The next step below that would be writer's PA, in a sense, or a production assistant. So the writer's PA, usually writers are veal. We are kept hostage in a writer's room, like for hours and hours and hours. You don't leave, but they bring you lunch. And when they bring you lunch, that person who's bringing you lunch is a hero because they're feeding you. And so that the writer's PA is usually the one who goes out on a run and brings you lunch.
You're listening to Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about various creative jobs in Hollywood, and we're going to probably start, I think, with the writers' room because there's a lot of myths that we're going to expose. I think a lot of people have misconceptions about how writers' rooms, how they actually work, right, Phil?
Yeah, and to your point, I think there are a lot of people who don't even understand things like what a showrunner is or what the difference between a co-producer, a producer, a story editor, all these different writer terms. I once had a friend mentioned to me, she wanted to be an actress, and she's just like, when you watch a TV show and you see all the credits at the beginning that say producer, they're all just writers. And she said it like it was condescending a little. It's just like, just writers. Like,
she's right, unfortunately. But yeah, so a showrunner is the boss on a TV show. In a movie, the director is the boss. In a TV show, the showrunner is the boss. And the showrunner is the head writer. Usually, the showrunner is the creator of the show, the person who sold it, but not always, and often not always the case. So a number of times my partner and I have been showrunners, and we didn't create that show. We're the hired hands because we have experience, and we're brought on to run the writer's room. And the writer's room can consist of, we've been on show, usually around 8 writers, let's say, but we've been on shows where we've had as few as 4 writers. And when we were on King of the Hill, that was Marin, when we were on King of the Hill, there were about at least 20 writers. It was a huge writing staff. So there's that. And then all the writers in a writer's room compose the writing staff, but there are different levels to writers. So the showrunner, again, is the boss. The showrunner decides what kind of stories to tell and how to tell them. And some people, I guess maybe I'll get to the misconceptions first. Some people think that, well, so where do you get these ideas from? Does the network just tell you what stories they want to have? And no, because there's no one at the network who knows how to do that. If they did, they'd be writers. That's not their job.
right.
So we pitch them our ideas, but we come up with the ideas. We say, we're going to do an episode about X, blah, blah, blah. And the network says, that sounds good. Go ahead and do it. And so we have to come up with the ideas. And usually it's the writing staff that will pitch the ideas to the showrunner. And the showrunner will say, oh, okay, I like that one. Let's talk about that one. Let's see if we can turn that into an episode. Or I like the beginning, but not the middle, And so let's stretch it out. That's how do we break that into a story? And another myth I heard all the time years ago was like, oh, what character, when I was on King of the Hill, they'd say, what character do you write for? As if like every writer was responsible for one character's voice. And there were 20 of us on King of the Hill. I don't know how many, there were like 5 characters or whatever. Or maybe more because there's periphery characters. But so no. And I used to tell people I used to write for the dog. The dog obviously didn't talk or have any lines, but that's what I said. But you write for all the characters. Your job is you get an episode and you write all the characters in that episode. And that's how it works. And so their staff, the writing staff is composed of 1 or 2 showrunners usually. And then there's certain levels of writers. So the newest baby writer is called a staff writer. That's the person with no experience. They just broke into Hollywood. Usually they're a staff writer. Then above them, let's say they work for a year, they get a promotion. Now they're called story editor. And you'll see that at the end of the credits often. You'll see the story editor gets a credit.
So let me ask this question, because this is something that came up on another podcast we did. You made a reference that all of these titles that you're probably going to go through right here, that the next year. So are you a staff writer your first year writing and then you bump to story editor?
Usually.
Or is it
you
you're so bad that you could stay staff writer? Is that a chance? Or do you just lose your job at that point?
Sometimes, you could lose your job if you're no good. Sometimes you'll be a staff writer on 1 year and then the show gets canceled and then you get another job on a different show and they make you repeat your staff writer. They say, you're not getting the bump because we don't have a budget or whatever.
The bump is budget based, I imagine, right?
Usually, yeah. I don't know of too many people who had to repeat staff. It's like repeating your first year of college, I guess.
Right. I got held back in preschool, by the way. So
yeah, well, I can tell. It's obvious when I talk to you.
Yeah. Don't start your kids in preschool in the middle of the year, guys. They just look stupid when all their friends move on.
For the rest of the talk about it years later.
Yeah, that's right.
And so then after story editor, you become executive story editor. Back in the 60s, the executive story editor that was the boss. I'm executive story editor. I mean, that was basically being called the showrunner, but these titles have changed over the years. And so executive story editor or story editor is, at one point, it was like the most important person, and now it's one of the least important people on the staff. I remember when I...
Go ahead.
Well, I remember when I had a writing teacher, and he wrote on Get Smart and Andy Griffith Show and all those great shows, and Twilight Zone, the original Twilight Zone, and all that. And he used to say that you got to impress the story editor. The story editor is the one who makes all the decisions. And this was back in the 90s. I was like, old man, what are you talking about? The story editor is like that title has long since changed. So
I was going to ask. So my understanding here is that this changed because you're about to get into the producer titles, right?
Yeah.
So my understanding is that this changed because the writing credit positions pay specific portions of their money into the WGA funds, but the producerial fees you get do not.
Separately. Yeah,
separately. And the benefit to the network and the studios is they don't have to match percentages of those funds to the Writers Guild stuff.
To your health and pension, right? Correct. It's separate, exactly.
So this is where it changes. Like, how do we get these people and entice them to stay with us without having all the other expense of paying percentages of their fees?
Yeah, we'll give them a fancy title.
Yeah,
that'll tide them over. They're stupid. So there's executive. So there's to repeat: staff writer, story editor, executive story editor. Then you get co-producer, and then you become producer, and then you're like, wow, producer. It's really just another level for writer. Then you get, after producer, it becomes supervising producer, then co-executive producer, which often means the number two writer, the number two in command, and then executive producer. Yeah. And sometimes there's also another title, consulting producer, which is just a fancy way of paying you even less money.
Got it.
So, but those are all just writers, and there's the producer aspect of those jobs are very limited. So, when you're executive producer, you do have many other producer titles. Your responsibilities. You'll be responsible for casting or post-production, supervising post-production, or maybe editing, stuff like that. The co-executive producer doesn't often do those things, but is capable of doing those things.
And that's what you currently are on the show.
On Tacoma FD, I'm a co-executive producer, right? But in the past, I've been executive producer on other shows. So, the difference in money, there's a lot. Is not that much. Well, the co-executive producer gets a good salary without all the stress of being executive producer. It's a good job to have. It's really the best job to have is co-executive producer because you make good money, but you don't have all the stress of the boss.
Got it. So that's what to aspire to is not be the showrunner, but just be a co-EP.
I remember years ago when I was, thinking before I became a showrunner, I was like, man, if I were a showrunner, I'd do things different, do things better. And then because you always think your boss doesn't know what you're doing, they're doing. And then you become the boss, and you're like, ugh, I just wish I was a co-executive producer. It's easier.
Yeah, you always wish you had the less responsibility. The more you know, the more you know you don't know, right?
Yeah, so, but then, those jobs, basically at my level, like those are the two jobs I get. You can either be the boss or the second in command. So I have to take whatever comes.
Awesome. So now there is another executive producer on the show, and that's typically basically the guy in charge of, or the person in charge of making sure that the show is happening from an actual producerial perspective, right? So
not always.
So the production. So for example, at Tacoma FD, we had a production company running things, and the owner of that company had the title of EP as well, and that shows up in the credits. And that person is not a writer.
Right, and I believe one of the managers, David Miner, I believe he's also executive.
I think both of the guys' managers are on our show. They have EP credits because they brought the show to the network and said, "We think you should buy this show."
Yeah, they help make it. They help sell it. They help make it possible.
Yeah.
But on other shows I've worked on, there's really there aren't too many executive producers. There's the showrunner and maybe no other. Executive producers, or maybe there's an actor who's so powerful help got the show made. They might be executive producer,
right.
Or maybe often if the show is sold through a pod, you have a production company, then they'll get like you're saying they'll have a executive producer title. So that's not really. Now that I say that, now that I think about it, I've been on other shows where other executive, not, they're called non-writing executive producers. So when I was on Marin, for example, Jim Sorpo and Tom Saletti, they were non-writing executive producers. They helped sell the show, and their creative involvement in the show, it really depends on what they have time for. Sometimes they're very involved, and sometimes they're not very involved at all.
Yeah. Okay. So that's an interesting note, I think. So those people have the same way. Now, from an office PA perspective, so during production, we still saved those people parking spots, and we understood who they were, and we made sure that they were included on every single email, every single notice that went out, anything that involved creative decisions. They were invited to all meetings, and there was always an understanding they could show up at any time, but also an expectation that they probably weren't going to show up.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting thing. Like, I remember, one season of a show I worked on, one of these non-writing executive producers showed up, and our office production coordinator didn't know who they were, but the secretary did, luckily. So they were able to save that situation, where it probably would have been a really, egg on the face situation.
Yeah. Because sometimes they don't show up. Right. Sometimes that parking spot is empty all year.
Yeah.
But sometimes they do show up because they. So those are all creative jobs. So when you see at the front of a TV show all those producers, like, what are all these producers? Most of them are writers. And then some producers, there's always a couple. There's a line producer. He or she will get a producer title, and they're in charge of they're in charge of the money and the budget. If, for example, the showrunner says, "Hey, I want to shoot a show in a submarine," and how do you make that happen? Well, the line producer, their job is to figure out how to make that happen. Either rent a submarine or get a soundstage that looks like a submarine, or tell you that's just too expensive. You can have to shoot it in a rowboat.
Right. Yeah, and then so there's a line producer and then a unit production manager, or UPM.
Yeah.
But they're different jobs, or they are the same job. Because I've seen it both ways. I've seen it's separated, or they're the same person does both.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. And I don't really know what the differences, job responsibilities are between the two, because on the shows that I've worked on, they've mostly been the same person. So.
Yeah. I think it's just a level of authority and responsibility. So UPM is typically making the decisions to make sure everything happens. And the line producer, my understanding, is basically in charge of the budget and making sure you're not blowing the budget every episode. And you can get to the end of the road, and they're like your accountant almost, I guess you could say, as the showrunner, right?
But we also have accountants.
Or like a CPA, like they're like the CPA who says, or a business manager, hey, you need to cut your expenses here because you have this thing coming down the road.
Yeah, often they'll negotiate. They'll be dealing with the unions, and they make sure that they make sure that the physical production of the show actually happens.
Yeah. So this brings up what we're discussing here might be considered above the line titles, right?
Yeah.
And we recently had an interesting conversation with someone who did not like the title above the line, and ultimately
they thought it was a derogatory.
Ultimately, it's like the union negotiates those things, so your union is responsible for earning you those credits and deciding what goes.
Yeah,
where.
and I think actually it's just like where you appear on the call sheet. It's like, are you above this line or below this line?
Oh yeah,
that was my understanding. It's like, and it's just a line. Relax, everybody. It doesn't mean you're on. It doesn't mean you deserve to die.
Right.
It's just it's basically an accounting formality.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. But you do not have control over who does that. Just to clarify, because this person seemed to think that you, in your role as an executive producer, showrunner, have the ability to dictate through your use of language who gets called what, so people aren't offended.
Yeah. No, I walk into, it's so strange. It's like I walk into these terminologies. The terminologies were decided before me. Yeah. And someone thought they were just very offended by that. And I'm perpetuating some kind of, I don't know, egregious, offense in Hollywood.
Yeah. And not to get like super into the weeds on this subject, but I do know this season on Tacoma FD, the production company did require us to use gender neutral terminology for things. So there's like a term for like the best boy, or best boy grip, or best boy lighting. And now that's like key lighting person is like a term. Different things, instead of foreman, it was for person. And so I understand those things, but when we're talking about literally anyone below the line is garbage and trash and we stomp and use them, that's not exactly what's going on in this space.
Now, those people are kind of important because they're writers, the above the line people, like maybe we're the dreamers, but hey, what if? And the other people are the ones who are doing it. So you can't just have dreamers on set. Nothing will get done.
Yeah, right. It's like I did hear an example on another show I worked on where they're like, they want us to have 50 people with the exact same haircut sitting in a restaurant. It's like, you don't understand the complexity of casting that, the complexity of finding those people, the hair and makeup, the cost for extra pay. Like, we got you 10 of those people, not 50, right?
Right. Yeah.
So those are all the jobs then, are just the ones that you've talked about. And those, basically, to get into Hollywood, you have to start as a staff writer.
Hi guys, it's Michael Jamin. I wanted to take a break from talking and talk just a little bit more. I think a lot of you people are getting bad advice on the internet. Many of you want to break into the industry as writers or directors or actors, and some of you are paying for this advice on the internet. It's just bad. And as a working TV writer and showrunner, this burns my butt. So my goal is to flush a lot of this bad stuff out of your head and replace it with stuff that's actually going to help you. So I post daily tips on social media. Go follow me at Michael Jamin Writer. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. And let's be honest, if you don't have time, like just 2 minutes a day towards improving your craft, it's not going to happen. So go make it happen for you at Michael Jamin Writer. Okay, now back to my previous rant.
And yes, then how do you start as a staff writer? There are entry-level jobs. So there's no assistant writers. People often say, well, I want to be an assistant writer on your show. It's like, that doesn't exist. There are writer's assistants. And those are the people who will sit in the writer's room and they sit at the keyboard and they usually either take notes or they type as the words go up on a monitor. We're watching a screen. And so they actually type the script as we pitch lines. And so that's it's kind of a high pressure job because you have to know the word processing program like the back of your hand, but also you have to be a good speller, because if you are not, people will make fun of you, and everyone's staring at you while you do your job and like busting your balls. So it's a high pressure job. You have to have a good sense of humor about it. And so, but it's a great job to have because once you're in the writer's room, and like you will learn more as a writer's assistant than you would the 10 years in film school, because you're watching professional writers do their craft. So it's a wonderful, it's a great learning experience. And how do you get a writer's assistant job?
Right.
Well, the next step below that would be writer's PA, in a sense, or a production assistant. So the writer's PA, usually writers are veal. We are kept hostage in a writer's room, like for hours and hours and hours. You don't leave, but they bring you lunch. And when they bring you lunch, that person who's bringing you lunch is a hero because they're feeding you, and so that the writer's PA is usually the one who goes out on a run and brings you lunch. This is before COVID, of course. I don't know what goes. No one brings me food anymore. No one gets within 6 feet of me.
That's right.
That's my choice.
Not even your family, right?
Keep an arm. Social distance, kids.
That's right.
So that's writer's PA, and then kind of, I wouldn't say below it, but adjacent to it would be regular PA or set PA, which that PA works on the set. Another job would be office PA, and that PA, the set PA might run errands or might block off the set when they're shooting an episode. The set PA will be on the perimeter. I'm telling you, you had this job for a while, and they're the ones who are. Let's say you're shooting on New York City street. They're on the perimeter, stopping traffic, saying to people, "You can't walk here. We're shooting a show."
Yeah, and let me point out here, our locations guy, when I said that I was locking down traffic, interjected and said, "You are not allowed to do that. That is illegal. The police lock down traffic. You are there to wrangle pedestrians."
Oh, interesting.
Right, because we do not have the legal authority to stop traffic.
Right.
But on a closed set, that was my first day of PA work, was literally standing in the hot sun out in the middle of Southern California, telling cars when to drive into the scene.
Yeah.
But it was a closed set, and I was literally doing that.
And
job.
you had your earpiece and a headset, so
and they were setting they literally call it background, and you tell them to move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
You tell them
so that would be a set. That's one of the responsibilities of a set PA.
Yeah, they're responsible for getting information to everyone, locking down set for sound. This is another very common thing where you literally post up at a doorway and you stop people from coming in and out because they're shooting that direction. And you don't want to walk through set. Like one of the first days of shooting of season 2 Tacoma FD, I walked onto a set and I looked right at the set PA and she didn't say anything. So I walked toward her and ended up walking right through the shot. And they showed it to me. They showed me in post me Sasquatching through the background of the firehouse.
And that's the job of the PA supposed to stop you. I've walked on sets before too of my own show where I was executive producer, and I guess some PA was too nervous to tell me not to walk on set, and I walk into the shot and I ruin the shot, and I'm like, dude, you got to tell me not to walk into the shot. Yeah. It's okay. You can tell. Don't be afraid of me. Tell me tell me not to ruin the shot.
Didn't you tell me that there was you had to spend like a significant amount of money in post cutting a PA out of the background, standing behind a tree or something?
I'm sure that, I'm not sure if it's a PA, but I remember sometimes you have to do that or you cut a reflection. Sometimes you see a PA or somebody is a reflection in a window. You have to take that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've had most of these PA jobs. So that's a set PA, and then office PA, you're the one making copies. You're the one making the signs. You're laminating things.
And going on runs.
You're going on runs and picking up stuff. You're going to Home Depot to buy specific daylight luminescent light bulbs for the makeup department because they need specific lights in the trailer. You're getting water. You're moving things around set. You're going out on a run to Burbank to pick up audio equipment for the audio team because they always need something. Yeah, you know all that stuff.
It's interesting because I posted a little bit about that on social media. I do like these little clips, and someone said you have to. I said it's an entry level job. It's not too hard to get. And someone said you don't know what you're talking about. You have to have you have a degree from Harvard or an MBA. I'm like, you're out of your mind. Like
I can tell you what you need.
You need a car.
That's it. You need a car and you need to breathe, right?
Yeah, you need a pulse. If you're dead, you're gonna struggle. But if you have a pulse, you be okay. It's like I don't really care. I don't need to know that you have a degree in heart from heart. What do I care? I want to know, can you go on a run?
Do you think that's people who just assume it's all an old boys club and it's all about who you know and it's not about like Harvard alumni will hire Harvard alumni? Is it that kind of thing? Or do you think they actually think you have to be like a Rhodes Scholar to be a PA?
No, I think there's, breaking into Hollywood is hard. That's, that first job, the hardest one is that first job to get in. And so you have to hustle and you really have to send out fly. You kind of have to really be in contact with people and you got to nudge your way in. And it takes a lot of work. And I think people would much rather say, well, they're not hiring people like me because, there's an excuse. As opposed to, that's not true at all. It's like you just have to do your end of the part. You have to hustle to get the job.
Yeah.
There's so many excuses. And like I always say, like you can have results or you can have excuses. The other way around. You can have excuses or you can have results, but you can't have both. Right. And people like to have excuses. It just makes them feel better for not trying or not trying hard enough.
Now I've been on that other side of things. I think my first PA job, you gave my resume to a show that you were running. And I didn't get that job. And I didn't get that job because your writing partner also referred someone and that person had experience.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't get that job. But because I did so well in the interview, when they needed a day player to come out and just lock down set for a day, they called me and said, hey, it's a one-day job. You want to come out? I said, absolutely. What time? Where should I be? I showed up early. I was there. I ran around set the whole day. And it just happened to be that day, the office PA was called back in to his Fox show and he had to leave. And so the UPM who was on set with me, watching me work, said, you should consider this guy. He seems good. And I got offered a full-time position as the office PA because of that. And
so is that luck? Did you get lucky or did you make your own luck?
I think that there's a level of luck. There's this old saying that luck is where opportunity meets preparation.
Right.
And so the opportunity came because I knew you and you were able to give them my resume. But I didn't get that job. Someone else got that job. And they had 3 other people who you and your writing partner did not recommend, who also got jobs because they had experience. And that's just the racket. But because I was willing to show up, and I was prepared and I understood what was expected of me as a PA, I was able to prove myself on that day, the chance I got.
Yeah, so, we had a PA on Tacoma FD. We talk about, I don't mention his name, but one day one of the writers asked him to get, for like Tylenol or Advil or something, to go to drugstore, and he kind of said no, he was busy.
So we should talk about that too. So the writer's PA job is not just lunch. Like you're responsible for whatever the writers need. Like the showrunners ask me for binders, but not just not binders, not D clip binders, but full ring binders because they don't like the way the D binders are. And it's my job to go get that for them. I'm also supposed to stock the fridge. I'm supposed to have first aid available. I'm supposed to clean up after them. And so to have a writer's PA tell a writer, I'm busy. I can't get you medicine because you have a headache. But I think it was worse than that. I think it was, do you know if we have any? I think they have some upstairs. Right. Can you go get some? I don't think I can do that.
Yeah. Right? I was like, man. And we all laughed when he said no. And, like, man, there's balls in this guy.
Shock. Yeah. And then
he didn't last much longer after that.
Well, he did some other stuff, I heard, too. And I think I ended up replacing that guy on the next season. But he did some other stuff, too. Like, you told me that he would just, like, stare through the glass at you guys while you were writing stuff.
Yeah, he had a weird thing where, like, he'd come into the room, the writer's room, and he just wouldn't know when to leave. And he was like, and it got awkward. It's like, hey, dude, you got to leave now. We got to work. And he would just kind of stand there, I don't know, gabbing or, watching. And it was just so uncomfortable. And the writer, we thought it was hilarious. We're like, this guy, he's something else. He's a character.
Well, he hit the nail in the coffin, and I think this is like a big note of what not to do, is one of our showrunners, who is an actor on the show, is like on Nutrisystem and like cutting weight to get camera ready because he's going to be, he's effectively starving himself to look good on camera. And he's entitled to lunch more than anybody else on the show because it's his show. And one day he comes in and he's like, today I want sushi. And he said, we don't have the budget for that. Right. And he said, I don't care. I'll approve it. Because it's his show. He's responsible for the budget. And he goes, I've already put in the other lunch order.
Yeah, that's what it was about. And that, and afterwards we were busting that actor's ass because, you're not in charge. He is in charge.
Yeah, you don't keep your job if you deny your showrunner food the one time he asks for it in the whole season.
So that guy didn't last very long, but your job is to say yes, not to say no as a PA.
Right.
Well,
interesting stuff, man. And ultimately, like, I got that job, and I think to your note, one of the first things you told me forever ago is if you want to make it in Hollywood, you have to be in LA because that's where the jobs are. And I think there's a caveat, because this is a question I've seen in a lot of your social media. People say, do you have to live in Hollywood to make it in film? And the answer is, depends on what you want to do. Right? So, for example, I went to film school in New Mexico, and New Mexico is a smaller market that is expanding ridiculously right now. I think Netflix is investing $1 billion in New Mexico in infrastructure, expanding stages, and they bought the biggest stages there where they shoot Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and all that stuff. And so if you want to work in camera, or you want to work in an office position or locations or a costuming position, my opinion is those exterior markets, Utah, where you have Park City Studios, you have Santa Fe or Albuquerque, where you have a vast growing film industry, you have Louisiana, you have Georgia. Those markets, it's really easy to progress and move up the ranks in those craftsman positions, right?
Right.
But when we talk about writing, I really think the answer is you do have to be in LA because this is where the writing happens.
Yeah, all the writing, like even Handmaid's Tale, they shoot that I think in Toronto. They write it here. I'm pretty sure Breaking Bad they wrote here in LA.
Yeah, wrote in LA, shot in New Mexico. Yeah.
Right. And so if you want to be a writer, then you want to be a writer's assistant, and you want to be a PA here in LA, so you can come up this way. But someone sent me a question, maybe it was on TikTok or something, and she seemed very lovely, but I still let her have it. She's like, I live in the UK, and I really want to break into the business, and I would gladly come here to LA if someone could guarantee me a job. And I was like, there's no guarantee. No one's going to guarantee you a job. First of all, there are no guarantees in Hollywood.
Right.
You're not, you're not Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt, he's guaranteed to get a dressing room and a driver. You're a PA. You have no guarantees. If you came here and got a job, let's say the show would get canceled after 10 weeks, or you get fired, or whatever, you're still out of a job. Now you're out of a job. And so you're still screwed. You have to come here first. And when they're hiring for those positions, that basically for any kind of PA position, the job is like you interview today to start tomorrow.
Yeah. And
so you can't fly here. No one's going to give you a week to fly here and then a week to find a place and then a week to get a car because you need a car. It's like, no, you have to be here for those opportunities. There's no guarantees.
Yeah. And that's what you told me. You said you have to be here because when they want to hire someone, they need you today. right?
Yeah, and I called you. I remember when that opportunity came up in our current show. I said, Phil, can you be here this afternoon? They're hiring. You have to be here today.
Yeah, I think the exact text was, we need a PA. The job sucks. It's low pay. Do you want it? And I said, I'll do that job for free. Right? And your response, good answer. That's how I got my first PA job. Hold on.
Yeah.
And then like an hour or so later, the script coordinator so basically shot me a text and said, hey man, looks like, we'd like to use you on the show. And I said, do you want my resume? He's like, no, Michael Jamin's word's good enough. And it's because you had proved yourself at that point. Right? And so they took your recommendation. And I literally showed up the next day.
Yeah.
And I haven't I haven't quit working on the show in 2 years. I'm still on the show.
And if you had right, and if you had said, well, yeah, I'll be there next week, they would have found somebody else.
Right. Because
so
literally, because they were buying their own. You guys were buying your own lunch at that point, I think.
Yeah, like we need lunch.
Yeah,
yeah. We can get lunch.
Carrie Clifford's like, I want my tuna. Which tuna do I get?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, having a good attitude and being ready to start tomorrow is really key. Unfortunately, that's how you if you want to work in Hollywood, you have to be in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And sure, there are other jobs like in Atlanta and Albuquerque, but often like it may be harder to have a career in those cities because there's just not as many opportunities. So I'm sure people piece together careers. I just think it'd be easier to piece together a career in Hollywood. There's just more opportunities.
Yeah, there are shows constantly shooting, especially right now with streaming and cable. There's not like a development season like there used to be, right? You're constantly.
Yeah, and you may have to move. I know like costumers, they work here, but they have to take a job in some other state because that's where the show is shooting. But writers generally have to stay in LA.
Yeah. So are there any other jobs or any other ways to break into Hollywood at this point? I mean, is it just you have to work yourself way up as a PA or get lucky enough to, be lucky enough and have the craft and skill to become a screenwriter? Or is there another option?
We talked about this in other episodes where if you have your own, if Hollywood's not going to come to you unless you really make it worth Hollywood's while. So if you are blowing up on Twitter, if you have a giant Twitter feed or, Instagram or whatever, and you have 1 million followers, Hollywood will find you. You don't have to start at the bottom. It's like, man, this person, he or she's got it going on. Let's give this person a show because they have a built-in marketing platform. That often happens.
Yeah.
So there's a show on CBS maybe 10 years ago, Shit My Father Says, and that was based on a popular Twitter feed.
Yeah.
And so, that guy just tweeted it from wherever he wanted. And, fun stuff that his dad said.
Got it. So I do know of other people who've broken in. So another writer who has done a lot of stuff to put stuff out there. His website, he's got scripts and things. Javier Grillo-Marxwatch, who I think you know.
Yeah, he wrote Lost.
Yeah, Lost. He was a showrunner on a bunch of stuff. So he, I believe, was a development executive. And he transitioned from that position to being a writer.
Yeah.
So there are those other opportunities as well. Do you know anything about those?
I do know. I have a friend who we hired on a show, Glenn Martin DDS, years ago. And I didn't know him at the time. We just hired him. We became friends. And I discovered after about a year that he was at one point a development executive at a studio. And I was shocked. I was like, I didn't, because it's a whole different thing. And he told me that most development executives they're jealous of writers. They want to be writers. And so, because it's more creative. And development executives, or, they tend to give notes, but they don't do it themselves. And so, because, it's one of those, like, why would you want to become an executive at a studio or a network if you had that creative passion in you? You wanted to create. And so the closer I think they can get to creating, the more fulfilled they would be, which is, obviously writing is probably closer than giving notes to somebody.
That makes sense.
But I'm not going to speak for all of them. I'm sure there are many creative development executives or creative executives who love exactly their job. But this is what he told me, was that he felt that many or most really wish they were writers.
Right. And I think that, from my limited perspective with the limited amount of work I've done, kind of the general vibe that I get from most people is that most people in most jobs in Hollywood dreamt of being a writer, director, producer. And they are now doing this other job, hoping to have the job that you're also trying to get.
I think many writers also want to be directors because it's not writing. It's like, because writing's hard. You're like, well, directing, that seems like something I could do.
Was that your experience when you directed on Marin?
No, that was just an opportunity that came our way. We didn't want to say no to it, but I know other writers who want to get into or have gotten into directing because writing is really hard. Writing can be difficult. Even like I used to say, like, if you think writing is fun, you're probably doing it wrong. It's hard, and to do it right, it's hard.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of writers like, well, anything but writing. So
Right. Well, awesome, man. I think that's incredibly helpful. You got any other thoughts or?
no, I think we covered a lot. We have more podcasts coming, Phil. We got to save it for the next one.
I love it. So again, I think that if you want any more of this information, definitely check out Michael's course because he goes into this more detail, kind of what's expected in some of those positions and what it takes. But yeah, I think the big note that I would like to give or leave people with is that you don't have to have won the lottery or be born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Mm-hmm. I sure wasn't. And I live in LA and I work full year round as a PA and I'm actively working on progressing towards being a better writer. So you can make it happen. You just have to get rid of the excuses and just take control and just make decisions about what can I do today to improve things. And we talked about this on another podcast. Like I've always was raised with this prodigy syndrome where I feel like I have to hit grand slams with everything I do. Mm-hmm. And there's this framework that I've transitioned to, which is, it's Moneyball. It's singles win baseball games. Yeah. If I can hit a single today, which might just be writing something. Mm-hmm. If I can hit a single today, it's not sexy. If I hit a single tomorrow, it's not sexy. If I hit a single on day 3, it's not sexy. But day 4, you score a run. Day 5, you score a run. And it's about chaining those singles together. And that's how you ultimately win.
Yeah, I think so. That makes sense to me. Yeah, like people say, well, how do I become a writer? It's like, if you write every day, you're a writer.
Right.
If you want to be a paid writer, that's a little different. But but if you're someone who wrote a script last year, you're not a writer. You're someone who has written. Mm. So a writer, you're constantly writing.
It's active.
And that will make you better at your craft and will increase your odds of actually becoming a professional writer.
Awesome. I love it. I think it's a great way to end. Thank you, Michael. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.
This has been an episode of Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin and Phil Hudson. If you'd like to support this podcast, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing this podcast with someone who needs to hear today's subject. If you're looking to support yourself, I'd encourage you to consider investing in Michael's screenwriting course at michaeljamin.com/course. I've known Michael for over a decade, and in the past 7 years, I've begged him to put something together. During the global COVID-19 pandemic, Michael had time, and I have to say, I wish I'd had this course 10 years ago. As someone who's personally invested in most online courses, earned a bachelor's degree, and actively studied screenwriting for over a decade, this course has been more valuable to me than most of the effort I've put in because it focuses on something no one else teaches: story. In his course, Michael pulls back the curtain and shows you exactly what the pros do in a writer's room, and that knowledge has made all the difference for me, and I know it will for you too. You can find more information at michaeljamin.com/course. For free daily screenwriting tips, follow Michael on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at michaeljaminwriter. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Phil A. Hudson. This episode was produced by Phil Hudson and edited by Dallas Crane. Until next time, keep writing.